Well, hello and welcome to Testimony Time. We're here today with Jordan Cousins. Woo! The crowd go wild.
Thank you very much. That's the best introduction.
Jordan, as many of you may know, is the youth leader at Chase Methodist Church and has been incredibly involved in getting things going online for us during this wonderful coronavirus lockdown that we've had. So we're going to find out more about Jordan because far too few of us know anything about him. So, Jordan, welcome.
Thank you. It feels very weird being this side. I've done, obviously, a couple of interviews myself. It's now weird being the other side of it. I don't know what I'm going to say. Who knows?
Oh, that adds a bit of spice and danger to it all.
It is risky. It's a risky time, yeah.
So, let's start with an easy one. Where were you born and where did you grow up?
So, I mean, if you want specifics, I was born in Poole Hospital. And for the first few years of my life, not that I remember it very well, I grew up in Bournemouth, in Dorset. And yeah, we had a couple of houses there. I only really remember one of them. And that was for the first 6 years of my life. The most eventful thing that happened there was I cracked my head open on a monkey bars. That was fun. Yeah, that was definitely interesting. That was my brother's fault, as it always was normally, really. And it was a very old set of monkey bars, and there was I couldn't do it at the age I was, so I was kind of holding onto his back as he did the monkey bars. Don't know why we decided this was a good idea. I must have been 5, so he would have been 9, and then I kind of fell, and there was like a kind of screw or nail sticking out of one of the legs of these monkey bars, and that cut the back of my head open. Still have the scar. So that's the most eventful moment of that time. I just thought I'd throw that out there. I love that story. It's quite a fun one. But that's where we were. And then after I turned 6, we moved to the New Forest and New Milton, which is where then I kind of spent the rest of my childhood growing up, really, which was great. And yeah, I definitely preferred it there. I was able to go, we lived on quite a busy road in Bournemouth. And so when we moved to the forest, we had a much nicer kind of quiet road that I could ride my bike on and learn to ride a bike on. And yeah, enjoy kind of time out with friends around. Kind of, we had this little circuit that we used to do a lot of the day.
So you're pretty much a local boy then.
Yeah, I guess so. We've always been South Coast, and obviously the New Forest isn't far, which is quite nice. So I can still see family when I want to. But yeah, so yeah, not bad.
So were your family involved in church when you were growing up, or was that something you came to separately?
No, they weren't particularly. My dad was staunchly against it. Not that, it's weird though, because my dad definitely wasn't Christian, and he actively would say he did not like kind of Christianity and church and religion and everything. My nan had a faith, and my dad's cousin was a minister or a chaplain in the army.
Yeah, they're very common, those though.
Yeah, exactly. And so I had lots of kind of external kind of Christian influences, but in my direct family, no, we weren't Christian at all. But at the same time, my dad we had a prayer that we said every night. I mean, it was kind of, we learned it by rote, that not a lot of people have probably heard it before. The Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep one. I don't know if you've heard it, but it's like a classic. And so we used to say that every night, and Dad was very insistent on that, even though he didn't believe in the person that we were chatting to. So that's all a bit weird. I've never quite known why. I think it was just he was one for tradition, really. But yeah, so no, we didn't. It was kind of later, when I was a teenager, really, that I first really started to explore church and faith and all that kind of stuff.
So where did you start with your exploration? I only ask because when you do it as a teenager, you can go off in some very strange directions at times.
That is true. So, I mean, it started, my first experience of any church that I remember was going to a holiday club, which was great fun. But I've said it before to a few people. I don't really remember any of the Christian content. I remember two things from that holiday club. I remember the youth worker's name was Jonathan at the time. I remember that we played some games, and one involved popping balloons with different disgusting things inside them. And I also remember them having a kind of mastermind quiz where you had to pick a specialist subject, and I chose Harry Potter because that's what I knew the most about. And that's all I remember from that time. So that was my first kind of experience. But that's not really, as I say, that's not really when I kind of started to explore. So it was kind of roughly 12, 13, I think 13, when I had a lot of questions as a child, and I was very inquisitive, and I wanted to know more. And I would drive my parents to distraction by asking them why all the time. I constantly asked them questions about everything. And as I got a little bit older and became a teenager and more, I guess, I don't know, stubborn, I wanted to ask the kind of bigger questions. I wanted to know, you know, what's the point in all of this? What's the point in life? And, you know, why are some things good for some people and some things bad for others, and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, I heard about Christians, and they had this belief in this God who apparently loves them. And I was like, you know, and yeah, that was the other thing. I had, for some strange reason, I had this weird, really need to know what happens at the end of time. Like, I wanted to know what's going to happen at the end. And so I remember, first of all, I started asking my nan, who was kind of the person I had the most contact with that was Christian. And she just said, I don't know, read this, hands me a Bible, and turns to Revelation. And so that 13-year-old me reading Revelation, and I remember specifically Revelation 21, reading that and kind of being encouraged by there not, you know, being no more pain and sadness and all of that kind of stuff. I think that's Revelation 21. I might be wrong, but somewhere in Revelation. And yeah, and so I thought, okay, maybe there's something in this. I want to find out more because no one else seems to have any answers. And so I remember asking my dad, like, I want to find out more about this Christianity stuff. And he was like, all right, fine, that's your choice, whatever. And so he did some digging locally for me, contacted a few local churches. And we found upon Ashley Baptist Church. And Dad got in contact with their youth worker, who then by then was a new guy, because it was also the same church I'd gone to holiday club years before. But his name now was Nick Humphreys. And yeah, Dad got in contact with him and said, you know, my son wants to know more. Is there anything that can help with that? And Nick said, yeah, we've got a youth club, kind of Bible study group starting this week. Does he want to come? And I was like, yeah, cool. And so that was fine, and I was all set to go and ready. I've since learned, years later, having got to know Nick much better, that he hadn't got it approved by the church, and he hadn't actually properly set up the group yet. But he heard non-Christian teenage boy wants to find out more about Christianity, and he was like, right, we're making it happen. Come on, let's go. Let's make it happen. So clearly he was receptive to God. If you want to give the cynical answer, he pushed it through very quickly. But the nice answer is he listened to God and took that calling and made it happen. So yeah, so that was fine. And yeah, and that's kind of where I kind of started my exploration, really, in that group. And it was, yeah, very much kind of a discussion group. And I asked lots of questions, and we went through lots of different parts of the Bible, and I learned a lot of kind of knowledge about Christianity, but I still wouldn't say at that point I was a Christian. And as well, so just to add a bit of spice, literally, to the testimony at this stage before I go any further. So when I first turned up the first week to that youth club, I was really nervous. Obviously, I didn't think I'd know anyone, but I walk in and it turns out I did know someone that was there. Because I'd met him that week as well. And that all stemmed from in science class at school. I was sat behind this guy, and he burst into tears in the middle of the lesson. And me being me, I was kind of like, well, this is awkward. So I kind of awkwardly sidled up to him and was like, you all right? What's going on? And then he kind of reveals that his house had caught fire that morning, but his parents had still sent him to school. while there was fire brigade turning up and everything. And so he was all cut up about that, obviously. And I kind of was like, okay, they're there. That's fine. What do you say? But it was kind of from that then I turn up to this youth club and see this guy that I've met, obviously briefly in a really awkward conversation, but it meant that I had a bridge between me and them because there was someone that I knew.
Yeah.
And it meant that I was able to get very comfortable, and him and I became really close friends very quickly. And then it turned out he was the youth worker's son. And it also turned out that we were meant to host this. Nick was planning to host the youth club in his house. He had obviously just had a fire and had to change the location last minute. So it's amazing how much was fighting against it.
Yeah.
To try and make it not happen. But clearly, again, hindsight's a beautiful thing. But you look back and it's just like seeing where God was kind of dropping things into place and making kind of things happen in the right way, and using, he didn't obviously cause the fire, but he's using awful situations and turning them to good. And I that's always been my strongest kind of encouragement in my own faith, is how God can turn bad situations to great ones. But
there's a very good lesson in there. If you want to get someone into a church, burn their house down.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
not to be recommended to any evangelists watching.
No, exactly. They might take you seriously.
But,
I mean, I will say it wasn't a full fire. It didn't burn down the whole house. It was a small fire caused by the shower light, and it burnt some stuff in their loft, basically, in the end. So, but it was still enough that it was significant, and enough that they couldn't host people around their house.
But it all came together to get you into a church.
Yeah, I mean,
quite an amazing story, really.
Yeah, I mean, I do quite like it, and I quite like telling it. There'll be people watching that will have heard it before, but that's kind of the first stage, really. That was me getting into a youth club, and as I said, getting lots of head knowledge. But as I say, I wasn't really a Christian at that point, and also at that point, I was still very much, I'm never going to church. That was my opinion. I was like, no, church is boring. I'm not going. I'm only here in this group to find out more, and then I'll be off. How wrong I was.
No, that's still the plan. You just haven't found everything out yet.
That is true. And it wasn't, so I didn't, as I said, I was really anti going to church, and it wasn't until a couple of kind of weeks or months later that they would start in the group talking about the conversations they'd had, but almost like a continuation from a Sunday morning, because they obviously had a Bible study group on a Sunday morning during the service as well. And so I started to get, if I'm honest, really jealous. I was really annoyed that I was missing out on these other conversations, and they seemed to know more than me, and I was not happy about that. And so I eventually, with gritted teeth, decided, right, I'm going to church because I'm not having this. I'm not being left out. And so I can officially say that I first went to church purely out of jealousy and envy and feeling left out. And so, I turned up to church and discovered it wasn't as boring as I thought it was going to be. And actually, it was quite interesting. And there was something there for me. And I enjoyed kind of the separate kind of youth group during the service as well. But I actually enjoyed the Sunday bit as well, the services. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. And all the while, so I started going to church at this point, and I started going quite regularly. And my parents didn't come with me at all. And then it wasn't until Christmas of that year that I asked them, would you like to come to church with me? It's Christmas. It's a nice thing to do. Can we all go? And they said yes. And then they quite enjoyed it, and they found it really good. And so they also decided maybe we'll come along too. And teenage me at the time was like, no, you can't come to church with me. I was like, I don't want you to come to church with me. Church is my thing. Church was almost my rebellion. My teenage rebellion was going to church because my dad was so anti-church. But as I say, he did find it for me. So, and I was really annoyed. And so my mum started coming regularly. And much to my delight, she was known as, oh, you're Jordan's mum. And that changed quite quickly. I very quickly became You're Paul and Carolyn's son. But I managed to enjoy it for a little bit. And then my dad eventually started coming too. And again, I was really annoyed because I thought this was meant to be my thing. You're intruding. in the very teenage way that you can. Oh, it's so embarrassing. And yeah, they came along, and then they eventually went on an Alpha course, and they became Christians themselves. And I think as well, I think annoyingly, they got baptized before me, even though I was to church first. They got baptized before me because I remember for a long time putting it off because I didn't feel ready. And actually, one of the best things that our minister, Martin, at the time said to me eventually was, you never will be ready, and that's the point. He was like, you're never going to be ready to be kind of accepting the Holy Spirit or what, and doing baptism and all that kind of stuff. He was like, the point is you recognize that you're not ready. And I was like, oh, all right, then let's do it. And so then, yeah, I got baptized from that. I mean, I've skipped actually a little bit my actual kind of this is real moment, but we can do that in a second. But yeah, that was kind of my journey from having no real church content, reading Revelation, going to a group, fires, getting jealous and going to church.
So all these youth workers, they obviously had a bit of an influence on you somewhere along the line as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I very much quickly, that didn't make sense. I very quickly discovered I quite liked working with those younger than me. So when I was kind of later teenage years, I would then help Nick with some of his younger groups, and I really enjoyed that. And he was really good at kind of giving me opportunities to lead stuff, and I especially enjoyed leading games, mainly because I could shout at children and throw dodgeballs at them. Can't do that as much anymore, sadly. But I was a teenager, so I could get away with it. And so I found that I really enjoyed that quite quickly. And to begin with, from that really, I stemmed, when I eventually went to university, I thought that I wanted to be a teacher because I liked working with children. And I went to Winchester University and I studied history, planning to then become a history teacher. And I very quickly got to know a lot of teachers because Winchester's kind of the hub of lots of teachers.
Oh, yeah.
Literally every person. I remember in Freshers Week at university, you always ask like, oh, what's your name? What halls you're in? What course are you doing? They were like the standard questions. Yeah. And almost everyone you spoke to is, oh, I'm doing primary ed, because everyone does primary education in Winchester. And it was very rare that you met anyone that did anything else. And so, yeah, having got to know some teachers at university, I very quickly decided I do not want to be a teacher. That just looks really stressful, and I don't want that. I've ended up marrying one, although she's not anymore. But yeah, I was absolutely, dependent. Well, I decided before uni I was definitely going to be a teacher, and then within a year I was like, I'm absolutely not going to be a teacher. Now what do I do? And then yeah, some doors opened, and here I am.
I think marrying a teacher confirmed your thoughts and suspicions about being a teacher were definitely correct. Just a shame you didn't know Ellie at that point when you could steered her in another direction.
Yeah, that is true. She, I mean, she can answer for herself, but yeah, she definitely, obviously she's left teaching. She was gutted that she was part of that statistic. There's a big statistic about teachers leaving within a certain number of years. Yeah. And she was really annoyed that she ended up being part of that statistic, but it's a kind of reflection on it is a really difficult job and we need to support them more.
Absolutely. So you said there was a defining light bulb moment for you. That's so interesting because, sorry, I was just going to say that some people, it seems to be sort of an osmosis thing where they just hang around Christians and suck it in and suddenly they realize, oh, I'm a Christian. And then for others, there does seem to be a very definitive light bulb moment. So tell us about your light bulb moment.
Yeah, so as I say, I kind of gained a lot of knowledge and I knew a lot of stuff about Christianity. And that's great. And I would always say, yes, if you're searching, keep asking questions. That's really important. But that's not what brought me to faith. I didn't have this relationship with Jesus and I didn't have any connection to it. It was just a distant kind of theory, I guess, in the same way that I would study science at school and be introduced to evolutionary theory or whatever. It was always just, oh, okay, that might be true, but that doesn't affect me in my life. And so it wasn't until we went to, and I always get a bit mixed up in this. I can't remember how long it was, but it was spring harvest. So it would have been April, and I don't know if it was. It was definitely November when I was 13 that I first started going to the youth group. So I don't know if it was the next April or the one after that. So I was either 13 or 14. And yeah, so I got invited to come along to this kind of youth camp, and I thought, oh, why not? Sounds fun. It's in Butlins. There's go-karts there. I'll enjoy the go-karts if anything else. And so we went, and I went on my own. My parents didn't come. They hadn't kind of properly sunk into church really at that point. And I remember I stayed in a chalet with two strangers that I didn't know, but from the church. And so that was fine. And yeah, it was kind of, for me, my eyes were opened a little bit initially. So I was introduced to a new style of worship, kind of very contemporary worship, which I was like, oh, wow, this is like really good and quite cool. And so I was like, great, that'll be fun. Again, that isn't what changed it. And it wasn't until at some point in the week, on one of the mornings, just a normal day, they started each session with going around asking people for their highlight of the day or something they'd done the previous day or whatever like that. And they came to this one girl, and they asked her the same question they'd asked everyone. And, you know, lots of people had given lots of answers. Like, oh, I went swimming today. I went on the go-karts today, blah, blah, blah. I ate Burger King, whatever. And they came to this one girl, and they said to her, what have you done today? And she said, oh, I walked. And we all kind of laughed, and were like, that's really funny. Of course, we've all walked around. Ha, ha, ha. She then turns around and goes, no, I was the girl in the wheelchair last night, and my friends prayed for me. And today I've walked for the first time in my life.
Oh, yeah.
And I sat there as whatever age it was, young teenager, thinking, wait, what? Wait, seriously? And then I kind of had this flashback to what I remember, and I can still picture it now, leaving the night before from the evening meeting, having enjoyed it. And I remember they always had like prayer ministry. I'd never gone up for that, and I didn't want people touching me. And I remember seeing all these people crowded around this girl in a wheelchair, all laying hands on her. Not that I knew what laying hands was at the time, and thinking, okay, cool, good for them. But I didn't see her have this miraculous stand-up moment. I didn't see that happen. But instantly I knew in my heart that it was true. And I knew that, and I recognized, I could see that it was definitely the same person that was in a wheelchair. So unless it was a big con, then, which I don't see that she would have done, because she didn't kind of look like she was faking it. And it just basically, for me, it was that moment of going, wait, this is all real. Like, God actually does stuff today. It's not just disconnected stories from this dusty old book from 2,000 years ago, which is my opinion at the time. And it kind of all kind of came to life for me at that moment. And I remember going back to my youth worker and saying, oh, it was amazing. We saw this girl and she could walk for the first time. He was like, wow, yeah, that's really cool. And I was like, wait, this is normal? Like, this happens? Like, God does stuff? And he was like, yeah, God heals today. Like, God, that's why we pray. Like, we've prayed every time we've finished a youth group. And I was like, yeah, but that's just what you do. Like, this actually works. And I remember really questioning him and being absolutely shocked that it was real and God actually answered prayers. And then I said, okay, well, how do I get a piece of this? What, how does this work? How do I feel close to him? How do I start seeing miracles happening, whatever? And he just said, well, you just need to ask him, just pray and say, God, come into my life, and he will. And so we did. I remember being sat on the floor and we prayed that prayer, and it wasn't, it was the first time, but it wasn't the last. I've prayed that prayer multiple times, like reconnected with God. Yeah. But I remember in that moment specifically, for the first time, kind of, it wasn't a crazy dove comes in from the ceiling, bright light, Jesus flies through the window moment. What it was just this real sense of peace and comfort, and just knowing that God's got me and he was there and he loved me. And that was my light bulb moment, really, that I finally knew that this guy that I'd been learning about actually cared about me and loved me more than anything. And that's what changed. And, you know, I could, through the rest of my life so far, because obviously I recognize I'm only 27, but, you know, all of those years since, you know, there's been ups and downs, but it's always been that I've known God's there. Even when I'm shouting at him and telling him you're not here, deep down I've always known actually, yes, he is, and he still loves me. And that's kind of what's got me through, really, you know, the difficult times that there's been, whatever those are. So yeah, that was what changed for me.
So that's a great story of that move from sort of head knowledge to heart knowledge.
Yeah.
Just sort of knowing in that way. So you said university kind of set you on the path towards youth leadership. There are still people who question your sanity for that one.
Yeah, true.
But how did you work your way into sort of becoming a youth leader?
Yeah, so as I say, as a teenager, I got involved with the younger groups and led kind of children. Then when I was at university, I got stuck into a church, and which was a nice experience because it was kind of felt like the old days when I was going to church on my own. And I'd chosen this church again for myself because this Christian Union did like church search where you go to lots of different ones. And I remember, well, that's quite a fun story as well. I remember I was really late in deciding which one I wanted to stick with. And I knew I really wanted to stay with one church, and I would always recommend that for anyone going to university is, you know, stick in one place because you can get stuck, like, you know, really get something out of joining that family.
Yeah.
And I remember I found it really hard, and it got down to this point. There was two churches in Winchester at the time. One was called City Church and one was called Harvest Church. And I remember being really stringent that I was like, I'm not going to choose until God tells me which one I'm going to. And I remember praying and praying, being like, God, where do you want me to go? And all I kept getting back with this kind of, it doesn't matter. And I was like, no, you're not allowed to say that. It clearly does matter. Which one is your plan for me? Where is your plan for me? Which church is it? Come on, tell me. And he was like, no, it doesn't matter. Pick one. And I was like, no. And this went on for a while, me and God arguing. And eventually I chose City Church and that was all because, bless her, it was this older lady called Vera, who from my home church at the time, Ashley Baptist, kind of, I had not seen someone kind of really engage in worship like her before. And I was just in awe of that. And it was just really encouraged me. And so, yeah, that's what made my decision in the end, just seeing someone fully go for it. And yes, actually, I'd say that I had seen people before, but it just really made it feel like home, is seeing someone else from this new church really engaging in worship. And she was in her 80s, but you couldn't tell. She was just dancing around and praising and, yeah, just going for it. It was amazing. And so that's what kind of made me decide to go to that church. And I was like, fine, I've made the decision, God, whatever. And he was like, cool, that's fine. The next summer, those two churches joined and became one church and became Level 10 Church, which it still is today. It still is known as Level 10. And yeah, so that's kind of where I settled, but that's kind of an aside story, which I just quite find interesting. And for that, it just shows me God's sense of humor. He didn't tell me that ultimate answer. He knew what was going to happen. And that's why he was like, no, you need to make a decision. Anyway, the reason I tell that story is because, yes, I chose that church, ended up going there, and very quickly I wanted to get involved, and I ended up helping them with their own youth work and their own children's ministry as a volunteer. And I ended up leading their Sunday morning kind of children's church with another person called Kirsten, and we worked really closely, and then also my friend Beth, and we quite worked together to kind of form that and make that kind of grow and really deepen in relationships with Jesus. And so we put a lot of effort in that, and that kind of gave me a lot of training and real interest in kind of beyond teaching, but actually sharing faith with young people. That was kind of a big change for me. At the same time, at university as well, I got involved with the Christian Union, and started off on the evangelism team, and then ended up becoming president. It sounds very fancy. It just meant a lot of work. It just meant I spent more time at CU than I did on my actual degree. And yeah, and I decided I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed kind of leading and having a kind of yearly vision and kind of pushing in, leading others in a journey of faith and kind of doing evangelism and all that kind of stuff. And it gave me a lot of tools and kind of a hunger to want to keep doing that. And I very quickly from that point knew I wanted to do something in church professionally. And then university finished, and by that point I'd met Ellie, and I knew I wanted to stay in the area. So I ended up living in a house that our church, Level 10, had bought. And I ended up living, me, the youth worker from that church, who was a good friend of mine, Silas, who I've interviewed on here already. And then a girl as well joined us. And we lived in that house for a while. Her name was Imi. And yeah, we lived together in that house, and that was great. But at that point, I was just working in an office for Denplan, which was a dental insurance company, which was fine. It paid the bills, and it was a lovely company to work for. And I got free dental care, so that was good. And then, yeah, there was a lot of kind of talk at Level 10 at the time about possible ways that they might be able to employ me in different roles and all this kind of stuff. And it kind of was sort of hopeful, but not really.
Yeah.
And then, but I knew I wanted to work for a church, but I didn't want to move churches at that point. I wasn't ready. Then my parents had their 25th wedding anniversary. And so obviously Ellie and I went, and that was nice. And lots of family were there, and lots of family that I hadn't seen for years, including my dad's cousin, David, was there, David and Ellie Moss. And by that point, Ellie was a teacher at Swanmore Primary. And so we were in the area. We must have been married by that point. So we were married, and by then we were living in Chandlersford. I was commuting into Winchester. She was commuting to Swanmore. And we were also, at that point, we'd saved up enough money to buy a house. So we were looking, where do we want to buy? And we weren't sure. Then, we got to this party, and Ellie ended up talking to David, who I hadn't seen at that point for a really long time, quite a few years, really, because he was always off doing something. And, well, actually, no, I guess the last time I would have seen him was when we went on mission with some of the guys from the circuit, not that I knew that they were at the time, but we ended up going on mission to Cornwall, and David had organised it. And yeah, there was Mark Chester and Graham and Stephen Fremantle and some others. Pete McGowan was there. And so, yeah, just a group of guys. Oh, and Steve Bridge, I think, came. Yeah, I think Bridgie came. And so there was and so it ended up, Dad and I, by this point, I must have been about 17, we ended up tagging along on this mission trip, and that was fine. And we had a great time and didn't think anything of it and moved on. Then, yeah, back to where I was. Fast forward, Ellie gets talking to David. And he was kind of, asking the normal questions, where do you work? And she said, oh, I work in Swanmore Primary. And he went, oh, I have a church in Swanmore. She went, do you? And they got talking, and then kind of without me knowing, they ended up arranging that at some point we would go around their house for dinner, and that we would organise it that I would come from Winchester, pick her up from Swanmore, and then we'd go straight to David's because it was really local in obviously Shirrell at the time. And so that was fine. And we had no idea. It was pitch black. I had no idea where his house was because it's obviously the Manse, obviously that's now Joseph's. It was down that little gravel road that's really easy to miss. So we were late, which David hates. But we turned up to the dinner. We turned up to the dinner, and it was lovely. And then David drops into conversation. And I don't know, actually. I've never asked him if this was tactical. I don't think it was. And I don't think he expected me to respond. But he drops into conversation, talking about his churches and the circuit, and saying, oh, really annoyingly, my youth worker's just left. We created this new role, and he only went for it, and he got it. And now I don't have a youth worker, and it's really annoying. And I remember kind of being interested and kind of perking up in the conversation and asking a bit more and finding out about kind of the church that it was, and being like, oh, this is interesting. But again, didn't really push further, and then went away. And kind of over the next few weeks, I kept kind of really playing over this conversation and really thinking about it, and it wouldn't leave my mind. And I was like, okay, maybe there's something in this. And so I found myself Googling the church and looking at the website and being like, okay, this looks really cool, looks interesting. And then I saw that the job spec had gone up, and so I was like, okay, this could be really good. And so I remember talking to Ellie. At that point, it was advertised as part-time. And so we knew, as we said, we were house hunting at that point. And so it kind of gave us a little bit of direction. We thought, okay, if I go for this, where would we want to live? We looked at the local area like Bishop's Waltham, Waltham Chase, and thought, nope, can't live there. Too expensive. Can't afford that. Especially if I'm about to take a pay cut. And so then we ended up looking in the area, and then we found this place, which I'm now in, spoilers, and in Fareham, and it was in our budget, just about, and we thought, okay, do we want to go for this? And so at this point, we decided I was going to apply, so I applied for the job, and then was offered an interview, which was like really exciting, and then, but it was a massive long process, and it took ages and ages and ages, but actually that suited me because it gave us more time to house hunt, get it settled, and also get more savings in. And then I went to interview, and it must have been in October by that point. So I'd applied in August, and then it wasn't until October that they interviewed me. And I went to the interview, and obviously it kind of went all right because they ended up offering me the job the next day. And I was like, yeah, I'd love to take it. And so Ellie and I had a plan that I would leave my job in Winchester, take this part-time job, and then I get another job in her school doing like as TA or something. And that was our plan, so that we'd have enough money to live. Then the next day, David calls me again, and I was on my lunch break walking back to the office. I can remember that as well. And I'd already handed in my notice at that point. No, I hadn't handed in my notice at that point because I wasn't certain, because I was going to have a conversation with them and see if I could go part-time with them initially. And then David calls me and goes, we've had a meeting. Do you want to go full-time? And I went, yes, absolutely. Probably should have consulted with Ellie first, but I said yes. Then called Ellie and was like, they've offered me full-time, and she was really excited. So I was like, phew, good. That's all right then. And yeah, that was it. And then he called me again the next day and said, oh, by the way, we've got our youth weekend away on the Isle of Wight. Do you want to come? I was like, oh, well, I can't do this day, but I could do this day. So he was like, fine, come for the day and just meet all the young people. And I was like, okay. So within offering the job, within 3 days, I was then on the fast cat from Portsmouth. And that was my first ever expense that he said, claim it back. I was like, I don't even work for you yet, but okay. And yeah, jumping on there. And then I met Tiz, and he was running it for the last time. And actually, it was really lovely because I was really nervous to meet him. Obviously, my predecessor, and was nervous that it would be awkward, but it wasn't. He was really welcoming. It was really excited that they'd obviously hired someone. And I think he was quite relieved to be able to, he'd left, but had still been doing it for half a year, pretty much. And obviously had organised Westbrook that year. And so, yeah, I ended up chatting with him for hours and hours and hours. I should have seen the pattern then. No, love him really. And yeah, then all the young people arrived, and I was very nervous, and I got introduced to them, and I had no idea who anyone was. It was all a big blur, because I was like, I don't know who any of you are, but I'm sure I'll get to know you, and obviously I have. And then I handed in my notice at work, did my month, and then was going to start in December. And that was it. It was church then couldn't offer me a start date for a while, and it all got delayed and delayed. And that was really good for me because at that point we'd confirmed our mortgage on this place. We confirmed what we wanted, but what we couldn't do was we couldn't actually do the final move, because obviously I was nervous about changing jobs and all of that because it might have affected the mortgage, and especially when it was initially part-time, and that was all a big worry, because obviously if my wage had gone down, we might have lost the mortgage. And all this kind of stuff. So I was quite happy for it to be delayed as long as possible. And then it all happened, and we ended up moving. We were meant to move on one day, and then they delayed us for a week, and it turned out someone along the chain had to delay a week, and we were really annoyed about it because I booked the day off from work, my old job, and was like, no, this is all going to happen. But then it turns out that then the day we did move, that morning the government changed their rules and they got rid of stamp duty for first-time buyers. And so our lawyer calls us back and goes, do you want your stamp duty back? And we went, yes, absolutely. So we got that money back, and it was amazing. And so that's the day we moved, literally just in time to get that money back, which was definitely God kind of helping us out again. And then within 3 days of moving house, I had one more day. I only did one commute from here to my old job, finished that, moved properly, and then the next week I started, and that was December 3rd in 2017, and I started my job. And so I managed within the space of a week to move house, unpack all the boxes on the 1 week I left myself without work, and then I started my new job on the 3rd of December. It was a busy, crazy time, but it all fell into place, and then here I am.
It really is like God was going out of his way to put you into a particular spot. It's an amazing story, the way all the pieces just fit together so well. But,
yeah, it was really cool.
So, youth work.
Yeah.
What for you has been the high point, and what for you has been sort of the biggest learning curve?
Ooh, good question. Okay, I'll do learning curve. Learning curve, I would say, is time management. Because before I came from a job which was very much 9 to 5, I was told basically what to do. I liked it, but it was very much the same. You came in, you logged into the phone, you did your job, and then you left. And that was kind of very structured. And if you were late, you were in trouble. Then I started this job, and I think it was adapting to kind of having control over what I did and when I did it. And that was the big learning curve. And yes, it was difficult, and there have been good days and bad days when I've been better at it. But yeah, really learning how to process that a bit more, and how to work through that really changed and affected kind of how I approached work. And obviously working in the evenings was a big difference as well. So kind of managing our weekly calendar, that was a big change. So yeah, that was a big learning curve. Highlights, just getting to know young people and kind of build up those relationships. I very quickly cemented myself as, even though I was 20 or so years younger than Tiz, I very quickly cemented myself as the granddad, as me. And also just, I really enjoyed the residentials. So I ended up, obviously not in this COVID world, but I ended up getting to do a residential with the school in June, a residential to Soul Survivor in the summer, and a residential in Westbrook. So I actually really enjoy those. They're hard and they're long hours, but I really enjoy that real connectedness. And that, I think that's where the deep, deep conversations can really happen, in those times where people let their guard down a bit. And especially Soul Survivor, some of the best conversations I've had with young people, without naming names, have been at about 2 a.m. when everyone's tired, but also they're just very open. It's great. And honest. And so that was really cool. And yes, you have other people in tents going, shh, but it's like, no, we're talking about Jesus. And put some earplugs in. So that's been some really cool highlights. I still really enjoy leading games. I like being silly. And I get to do that in my work, which is fun. And yeah, that's been really cool. And in this post-COVID world and lockdown world, something I've really enjoyed is being able to do some kind of mentoring one-to-one with some young people. That's been really fun. But also just being able to continue and have that interaction and do a lot more youth work with Ellie has been really fun, obviously, because she's the only other person I was allowed to have contact with in lockdown. So I've been doing a lot more with her as well, where we've both been working from home. That's been really fun. So yeah, there's been lots of highlights. There's loads I could talk about. Carol service, love doing those. But yeah, there's been some great ones, but there's been learning too. Lots of challenges.
Yeah. You have promised me a pantomime.
I have, and we will do a pantomime at some point once we are allowed to be there.
Because my family are desperate to see me as a pantomime dame.
I think you'll make an excellent pantomime dame. And I know the pantomime I want
I'll
to do.
even
It's
shave
called
for it.
Excellent, quite right too. And I can't wait, and we will do it at some point. I really want to, and because I said, I know the pantomime we're going to do, which is a lad in a manger. Great pun. But it's a cross between the Aladdin kind of pantomime style and the nativity story. And so we will do it at some point, I promise. This is the official public announcement. I don't think I've ever announced it this publicly.
Absolutely. I thought I'd put you on the spot now while I had the opportunity.
Yeah, that's true. That's fair enough. So yeah, we will at some point. It might not be this year now, which was originally my plan, but hopefully next year.
I shall look forward to it. I'll keep my calendar clear. So
excellent.
Obviously, we've gone through what seems like decades of lockdown now. Yeah. Where each month seems to have been about 4 years or more long. That's obviously going to have made a big difference in how you work. What have you learned from that? Have you managed to pull anything new out of that? Because I know for me, it's been a real learning curve and looking at ways I can do things differently. I'm curious to know what you've learned from it.
Yeah. I definitely learned, as you say, that kind of new ways of doing stuff. I've had to learn Instagram a lot more than I ever wanted to. So I don't have Instagram myself personally, and I was always very strong on that. And in the past, I mainly used the youth Instagram just for daily Bible verses, but I've had to get kind of a bit used to that. Ellie and I have discovered TikTok and have made a couple of videos on that as well. So we've engaged in that world as well, but not as much as we'd like, but we're hoping maybe in the future we might do a little bit more of that. But also just, I think I've learned how resilient young people are, whereas the whole world can be panicking and people in the news are saying, lots of stuff that's really depressing. What I've learned is actually young people are just like, get on with it. Like, this is what it is. These are the people, especially those in those transitory years, like the year 6s, the year 11s, the end of uni lot, the third year of uni. All of those, they've had masses pulled out from them under the rug. They've had their end of term celebrations. They've had their, transition stuff removed. All of that kind of stuff is gone, but they've just gone, okay, let's just keep going. And I think it's an amazing time that we've had this in terms of we have technology to keep in contact. I've learned that worshipping on my sofa is a lot more comfortable than worshipping in a church. But I'm really excited to go back to church, but let's be honest, it is a bit more comfy. I've learned that my neighbours are really keen to, we had on one of the mornings, I think it was Daisy and Seb leading worship, and they were it was an amazing set, and I was really getting into it and properly being loud, and we had our doors open, and I look over to my right and there was people kind of behind in the house. Actually, the doors are open, so I should probably be quieter, but they were like peeking over going, what's going on? And they could just hear this music and us like dancing around and singing in our living room, so that was fun. What else have I learned? I've learned to kind of change, and I've learned that meetings don't have to be as long, and actually online meetings work pretty much just as well. I've learned that they're also more tiring online. I think it's definitely tiring to lead stuff like this. And I've just learned that, beyond all of this, even when humanity is in chaos, God is still solid and strong and unchanging, and he still loves us. He can still engage with an entire congregation of church even when they're not all together. And I think it's put a lot more emphasis back on what he can do rather than what we can do.
Yeah. It's interesting you've gone for Instagram and TikTok. It just shows that you're dealing with youth. I mean, my life seems to be on Twitter and Facebook, where all the old people go.
Yeah, I mean, I've tried stuff on Facebook with the young people, and it doesn't get as far. I will get a couple of parents kind of commenting and replying, which is cool for like the challenges that I've set on Monday nights and all that kind of stuff. But generally, it's been mostly on Instagram and TikTok, because that's where you can engage.
Yeah. Darn, that means I need to learn Instagram Live now.
I mean, I would love to see you do some TikTok dances as well. You do great.
Well, I'm up for anything. TikTok dancing sounds intriguing.
I'm sure if you ask your daughter, she'll help you.
Oh, yes. Well, my son seems to know more about TikTok than my daughter does, so interesting. So, from all the new things that you've learned, when things start changing again, what have you learned that you want to hang on to? What do you think would be useful to take forward?
It's a good question. I think being able to do stuff a bit remotely is possibly useful in terms of if something was happening, if we wanted a guest speaker but who couldn't get there on a certain date, I don't think there's any problem in using online resources for that. And obviously I can do that in the basement. That's one small thing. But also I think it's just general people looking out for one another. I think that's really important. And I think, in the young people and in the older people, all of us need to kind of take away supporting one another more. We don't want to lose that. And I also think it's recognizing how busy all of our lives were before. We didn't have time to do lots of the stuff that this has opened up and allowed us to do in this lockdown. And I've really enjoyed the kind of slower pace a little bit, and not being stressed all the time, and not being in one door and out the other all the time, but actually to get on with stuff and really devote proper time and energy into more specific things. And I think that's something that we really need to continue as all of it, not just in church work, but in normal jobs, as it were. I think we don't want to lose that.
Well, having worked with a lot of people myself in sort of the 18 to 25 range, I've met and known a few who've kind of looked at youth work and thought, maybe. What would be your advice for anybody thinking about doing youth work, apart from run?
Well, I think push on the door, because it can't hurt. Look into it, see what there is out there, and just test it with kind of God, and start to go down that path. And if it's not going to happen, or not meant to be, and it might not be straight away, but give God time and keep asking him, and keep trying. And if the way I know God is that if it really isn't going to happen, he will not just close the door, but he will guide you to another door. And so you never know what you might end up in. So definitely that. But then my next advice for those just starting out is get a good team around you, for doing the youth work, but also a good team of support just for you. That's really important, and that's crucial. And there's been so many people that I know pray for me and are there to chat to, and that is completely essential to keep going and keep sane. Be prepared for some late nights. Be prepared for some tears. Be prepared for lots of laughter. And also be prepared for making yourself look a bit stupid at times, and being that person, because that's okay and that's fine. Or at least, maybe not everyone does it exactly the same way, and there isn't a one size fits all, but that was my experience.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you, Jordan. I will wind it up there and let you get back to enjoying the rest of your, no doubt, very busy day. So thank you, and have a good day. Bye now.
Thank you so much. See you later.
Bye.